Nurse opened his door, late one night to save a bleeding woman, unaware. Her dad was a billionaire. Latrice, a black nurse worn down after many years at a busy county hospital, retreats to a quiet rural town in Alabama to escape the weight of it all. As he lies awake through the same sleepless nights that have lingered for some time now, urgent knocking shatters the silence. Through the window, he spots a young white woman nearly collapsing, blood soaking her clothes, one arm badly injured. Instinct takes over. He rushes to open the door, helps the young woman inside, and cares for her with devoted attention. He has no idea that only a few days later, when the girl's cold, powerful billionaire father comes looking for her, the fate of all three of them will change in a way none of them could have imagined. This story is fictional, created to share meaningful life lessons with you. We're Memorial Stories, and we're glad you're here. The night finally broke. Nobody was there to see it. It was a regular shift. Nothing unusual on the board when he clocked in. A man came in late in the evening, late 50s, cardiac arrest brought in by paramedics who had already been working on him in the ambulance. His team took over without missing a beat, the way they always did, the way he had done hundreds of times before. Compressions, shocks, medications, everything they had. And they lost him. The doctor looked at the clock and called the time of death. Latrice pulled off his gloves, walked to the break room, and poured himself a cup of coffee. That was it. That was his entire reaction to a man dying right in front of him. He stood there watching the steam rise and waited to feel something. Sadness, exhaustion, even just the dull heaviness he usually carried home after a bad shift. Nothing came. Just a blank, hollow quiet inside his chest, like walking into a room and forgetting why you went there in the first place. A man just died 10 feet away from me, he thought, and I feel absolutely nothing. That was the moment he knew he was done. Here is what nobody tells you about working in the ER for so many years. It does not destroy you in one night. There is no single shift, no one patient, no dramatic moment you can point to and say that is where it happened. It is so much slower than that, so much quieter. Every day the job reaches into you and takes a little something, and you let it because you have convinced yourself that giving everything is just part of who you are. You help people. That is what you do. You do not get to be tired, so you keep going. You run harder, stay later, hold yourself together in front of patients, and fall apart in supply closets when nobody is watching. You stop sleeping full nights. You stop returning calls. You get to the point where you cannot sit through a quiet dinner without flinching when someone's phone goes off nearby because in your head, every notification sounds like a code being called over the PA. And then, one ordinary night, standing in a break room with a cup of coffee going cold in your hands, you realize the well is empty. There is nothing left to give. Not to your patients, not to yourself, not to anyone. He quit the next morning. He found a rental house in rural Alabama a few days later, an old, cheap place sitting in a town so small it barely registered on a map. He signed the lease without visiting, packed 2 bags, and drove south with one single thought running through his head the entire way. I just need everything to stop. Several months later, late one night, Latrice was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling of that same house. The silence out here used to feel like relief, like finally being able to exhale after holding his breath for years. Now it just felt like a room he could not leave, because the silence did not actually empty his head the way he had hoped. Every night was the same. He would close his eyes and suddenly he was back in that building, back under those fluorescent lights, back in the middle of the noise and the blood and the weight of it all. The PA calling a code overhead. The flat line on the monitor that does not come back. The way certain patients would grab his wrist when they were scared, holding on like he was something solid in the middle of everything falling apart, and ask him, "Am I going to be okay?" And he would have to answer. Every single time he had to look them in the eye and answer that question, knowing sometimes he was telling the truth and sometimes he was not, and never once letting his face show the difference. You are going to be fine. Hundreds of times he had said it, to people who were and to people who were not. He rolled onto his side, pressed his face into the pillow, and told himself the same thing he told himself every night. Stop thinking. Just sleep. You are not there anymore. That is when the knock came. 3 hard bangs against the front door, heavy and urgent, carrying the kind of force that meant whoever was on the other side was not thinking about the hour and was only thinking about one thing: getting someone to open that door. Latrice sat up immediately, his body already moving. Many years of snapping awake the second something demanded his attention had not faded. Late one night in a town where most people were in bed early and nobody came to your door after dark without a reason, that kind of knock was not a coincidence. Out here at this hour, an unexpected knock on the door was almost always the beginning of something bad, the kind of thing that found you whether you were ready for it or not. He grabbed the heavy metal flashlight from his nightstand and moved to the window beside the front door, pressing himself against the wall so he could see the porch without being seen. What he saw made his stomach drop. A young woman, white, in her mid-20s, barely standing. Her right shoulder was braced hard against the doorframe and her left arm was hanging at an angle that no arm should ever hang, the kind of wrong that told Latrice everything he needed to know before he even opened the door. But worse than the arm was everything else. The shirt soaked dark with blood. The deep gash above the woman's left eyebrow still actively running, a slow, dark line tracking down the side of her face and dripping off her chin onto the porch boards. Her eyes were open but glassy, carrying that specific unfocused look that Latrice had spent many years learning to recognize. The look that meant the body was still present, but the mind was already starting to slip somewhere far away. The woman raised her hand and knocked again, just twice, so softly it barely made a sound, like she was spending the very last of what she had just to reach the door one more time. Latrice's hand was already moving toward the deadbolt before he made a conscious decision to open it. "You drove all this way to get away from exactly this," some part of his brain said. "You quit. Remember, you are not a nurse anymore." He opened the door anyway. The woman looked at him, and for a moment neither of them moved or spoke. Then she opened her mouth, and what came out was not clean or composed. It was raw and unsteady, held together with almost nothing. "I'm sorry," she said. "I saw your light on, and I did not know where else to go. My arm, something is really wrong, and I cannot make it stop bleeding." "Okay," Latrice said, and his voice came out exactly the way it used to in the ER. Calm, flat, already moving past the problem to the solution. "I have got you. Do not move." The woman let out a breath that landed somewhere between relief and a sob, and then her legs gave out entirely. Latrice caught her before she hit the floor, one arm under her back, one hand behind her head, absorbing the weight as he guided her down. The woman went completely limp, head falling back, eyes closing, and Latrice lowered them both to the ground and kept his hand steady under her neck. "Hey," he said, sharp enough to cut through. "Stay with me. What is your name? Can you hear me?" Nothing. He got her inside and flat on the living room floor, pulled the lampshade off and angled the bare bulb down close. 2 fingers to the neck. The pulse was there, fast and thin, but real. He checked both eyes, watched the pupils pull tight in the light. Reacting. He grabbed a dish towel from the kitchen, folded it into a firm pad, and pressed it hard against the gash above the eyebrow, holding steady pressure. With his other hand he worked quickly and carefully. The broken arm he already knew about and left alone. Both palms were torn open with gravel still embedded in the wounds. Ribs intact. Abdomen soft and clear. She crawled, Latrice thought. Whatever happened out there, she crawled her way here. He sat back on his heels and looked at this woman's face. Young, pale under all the blood, a small faint scar on her chin from something old and long-healed. Someone's daughter. Someone who had people out there right now with no idea where she was or what had happened to her. Latrice pressed the towel firmer and held it there. And somewhere underneath the emptiness and exhaustion and running away, something shifted. Not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly, the way a door opens that you forgot was still there. "Hang on," he said softly. "I have got you." Latrice did not know her name yet. He did not know where she came from, how she got to that road, or what had happened to her out there in the dark. All he knew was that whoever this woman was, she was alive. And for tonight, that was enough. What he did not know was that somewhere a few miles north, in a glass tower above the Atlanta skyline, a man was about to have his entire world collapse. Gregory Langston did not do mornings the way most people did. By early morning, he was already at his desk on the top floor, jacket on, tie straight, the city still gray and half asleep below him. His assistant had learned in the first week never to bring him coffee without the morning brief attached. He did not do small talk. He did not do pleasantries. He did not do anything that was not moving something forward. The company ran on his schedule, and his schedule ran on precision. People who worked for him said two things behind his back. First, that he was the sharpest man in any room he walked into. Second, that being in a room with him felt like standing too close to a machine that could crush you without noticing you were there. Langston had heard both. Neither bothered him. He had built Langston Capital from a single regional fund into a multi-billion-dollar operation, and he had not done it by being warm. He had done it by being right, consistently, when everyone else was second-guessing themselves. The market rewarded clarity. His investors rewarded results. Everything else was noise. His assistant knocked twice and stepped in. "Sir, your early call confirmed, and you have the Chicago partners on the line." "Move the Chicago call to later," Langston said without looking up from the document in front of him. "And tell Davies if he cannot have those projections on my desk by noon today, then I do not need them at all." "Yes, sir?" She hesitated at the door. "Also, your phone has been going off. Personal line. I will look at it when I am done." She left. He kept reading. That was the thing about Gregory Langston. He was always done with one thing before he allowed himself to move to the next. Compartmentalization was not a skill for him. It was just how he was built. Work here, everything else there, a clean wall between the two and no reason to knock it down. He finished the document, reached for his personal phone, and stopped. 17 missed calls. The first 14 were from an Alabama area code he did not recognize. The last 3 were from Detective Ray Holloway, a name attached to the Alabama Highway Patrol. Langston stared at the screen for a long moment and called back. The detective picked up on the first ring. "Mr. Langston." The man's voice was careful in the way that voices get careful when they are about to say something nobody wants to hear. "Sir, I am glad you called back. There was an accident last night on County Road 12 out in Hale County. A vehicle registered in your name, a white Audi, went off the road." Langston was already standing. "My daughter drives that car." "Yes, sir. We found the vehicle in a ditch. The airbags deployed. The windshield was cracked through." There was a pause, brief but heavy. There was significant blood inside the vehicle and on the surrounding area. The floor did not move. Langston knew it did not move, but something in his body registered it like it had. "Where is she?" "That is why I'm calling, sir. We do not know." He was at the Hale County Hospital by mid-morning. Not because it was a good hospital, but because it was the only hospital within miles of where they had found the car. The building was small and tired-looking. The kind of facility that had been underfunded for so long it had stopped pretending otherwise. 1 ER bay, 2 nurses on shift, a waiting room with plastic chairs, and a television mounted too high on the wall. Langston walked in wearing a suit that cost more than the monthly operating budget of the radiology department, and nobody stopped him. The nurse at the desk, mid-40s, steady eyes, the kind of person who had clearly seen enough to not be rattled by expensive suits or tense jaws, looked up when he approached. "Gregory Langston," he said. "My daughter is Natalie Langston, 24 years old. She was involved in an accident on County Road 12 last night. I need to know if she was brought in." The nurse checked her screen, then checked it again, and the second check was the one that told him everything before she opened her mouth. "Mr. Langston, a young woman matching that description was reported at the accident site, but she was not transported here. The paramedics found the vehicle and evidence that someone had been in it and had been injured, but," she stopped, chose her next words carefully. "When they arrived, there was no one in or around the car." "What do you mean there was no one?" The working theory from the first responders is that she may have exited the vehicle after the crash and moved away from the scene before anyone arrived. Given the condition of the car and the blood evidence, she would have been seriously hurt. Langston placed both hands flat on the desk and looked at this woman directly, the way he looked at people when he needed them to understand that whatever was about to come out of his mouth was not negotiable. "My daughter is somewhere out there injured in a county she has never been to in her life, and nobody brought her in." The nurse held his gaze. "I am sorry, sir. We do not have her." They took him to the scene 20 minutes later. The car was still there, sitting nose first in the drainage ditch off the side of the road, the front end crumpled, the driver's side door hanging open. Langston stood at the edge of the road and looked at it and felt something he had not felt in a very long time: the specific suffocating helplessness of encountering a problem that money could not immediately fix. Detective Holloway stood beside him, going through the details in the measured tone of a man who handled these situations regularly and had learned that steady voices helped. They had found her bag in the back seat, her jacket on the passenger floor, her phone on the ground 10 feet from the car, screen cracked but still lit. Langston picked up the phone in a gloved hand. The detective had already cleared it and looked at the screen. 12 missed calls, all from his number. The most recent one was from just before the estimated time of the crash. He had called his daughter 12 times that night, and she had not answered. And then her car went off the road, and now she was gone. He stood on the side of that road holding her cracked phone and did the math that he did not want to do. Months since they had had a real conversation. Not a quick call about logistics, not a 2-line text about holidays, a real conversation. The kind where you actually asked how someone was doing and waited long enough to hear the answer. Months of clean walls and full schedules and telling himself there would be time later, when things slowed down, when the quarter closed, when the deal was done. Later never came. And now she was somewhere out here bleeding alone in a place she did not know, because she had been driving a back road late at night for reasons he did not know either, because he had not asked, had not called, had not made the kind of space that would make her want to tell him anything at all. The detective was saying something about search grids and response teams and the K-9 unit arriving soon. Langston was not listening. He was staring at the tree line at the edge of the road, dark, dense, stretching out in every direction with no end he could see, and understanding fully and without any way to argue himself out of it, that somewhere in all of that his daughter was trying to survive a night he had not been there to prevent. By the time the K-9 unit arrived, Langston had already spent a fortune. A private investigation firm out of Atlanta, a helicopter service with a bird in the air within hours, 3 search and rescue contractors covering the entire southeast region. He had called the county sheriff directly, bypassed the deputy who tried to manage him, and made it clear in the flat tone he used when conversations were already over. Every available resource was being pointed at this, starting now. Anything he could not get through official channels, he would pay for himself. Within hours, helicopters ran grid patterns over 3 counties. Search personnel swept the terrain on foot, and every law enforcement officer within miles had Natalie's photo on their phone. Langston tracked every update in real time from the church parking lot they had turned into a command post, and with each hour that passed without news, the thing sitting in his chest got heavier and harder to push down. Sheriff Briggs, a broad, weathered man who had worked this county for many years, walked Langston to the tree line near the crash site that first evening. The blood trail from the car moved northeast toward the road shoulder, followed the drainage ditch for a stretch, then cut left onto a dirt access road running between 2 properties, and then it stops. Could mean she found help. Could mean she collapsed somewhere we have not reached yet. Could mean the rain washed the rest of it. He paused. "We are going to keep looking." Langston stared at the dirt road stretching away into the dark. A flashlight swept through the tree line ahead, left, then right, then disappeared. Above them, a helicopter banked and turned, its spotlight cutting a white circle through the black. She was out there. He knew she was out there. The search teams worked through the night and into the next days without finding anything. The dogs tracked a scent northeast for half a mile before losing it at a creek crossing. The helicopter crews reported nothing, Every house within miles had been checked. It was on the second afternoon when Briggs came back from the field and said quietly, "Several days is a long time for someone with serious injuries in this kind of terrain, Mr. Langston. I want to be straight with you." Something cracked open inside Langston that he had spent years keeping sealed shut, because he had heard those words before. A doctor, years ago, standing in a hospital corridor with careful eyes telling him that things had moved faster than expected, that he needed to come home. He had been in Singapore when that call came. Weeks before that trip, his wife Sarah had been diagnosed with stage 3 cancer. Langston had done what he always did: hired the best specialists, set up every system that could be set up, made sure everything that could be arranged was arranged. And when Sarah looked at him and said, "Greg, go close your deal. I will be fine. I do not want this to cost you everything," he believed her because he needed to, because it was easier than sitting with the alternative. He flew to Singapore, closed the deal, landed back in Atlanta to a message from Natalie saying, "Dad, you need to come to the hospital now." He made it back hours before the end. For a long time afterward, he told himself he had made it back in time. What he never let himself examine too closely were the weeks before that. Weeks when Sarah was still home, still herself, still the woman he had loved for decades, and he had been present for pieces of it and absent for most of it because there was always something that could not wait, always a reason the next thing had to come first. He was very good at not thinking about things that could not be fixed. But standing now on this county road, staring at a dirt trail that ended in nothing, he felt it move through him like a current, the same helplessness, the same cold recognition that the worst thing imaginable was already in motion. And he had absolutely no way to stop it. He had lost Sarah to time he had spent somewhere else, and now Natalie, the only person he had left, was out there bleeding and alone, driving a back road late at night for reasons he did not know, going somewhere he had not asked about, living a life he had mostly watched from a distance and called it being present. The rain came on the second night, heavy and relentless, and by morning it had erased everything. Every trail mapped, every track marked, gone. The dogs lost the scent. The helicopters stood down in the low cloud cover. The foot teams pulled back to regroup. Langston stood outside the command post watching the rain fall through the parking lot lights. His jacket was soaked through. His tie was gone. He did not remember taking it off. His assistant had driven from Atlanta with a bag of clean clothes he had not opened. Days without sleep. His hands were not steady anymore. His thoughts moved in the wrong order. At one point, Holloway had put a hand on his arm and said, "Even a few hours would help, sir." And Langston had looked at him with eyes that were barely holding together and said, "She has been out there for days." Holloway did not push it. Briggs found him near midnight, standing at the edge of the parking lot staring at the tree line, and stood beside him in the rain before speaking. "My people are still out there, and they will be back at first light. We are not stopping." "I know," Langston said, "but I need you to hear me." Briggs said it the way a decent man says something that has to be said. "Several days with the injuries she had coming out of that car. You need to be prepared for what we might find." Langston did not answer right away. He stood in the rain with his ruined jacket and his hollowed-out eyes and looked at the tree line, the same one he had been staring at for days, the one that had swallowed his daughter whole and given him nothing back. He thought about Sarah in a hospital bed holding Natalie's hand because his was not there yet. He thought about every phone call he had let go to voicemail, every dinner that never happened, every time Natalie had reached toward him and he had held up one finger and finished the sentence he was on first. He thought about the 12 missed calls on her cracked phone. "She has to be alive," he said, and his voice came out stripped of everything that usually lived in it, the authority, the control, the careful distance he maintained between himself and anything that could reach him. What was left underneath all of that was just a man standing in the rain, terrified of losing the last person he had left, knowing that if the worst had already happened, he would spend the rest of his life carrying the weight of every moment he had chosen wrong. Briggs put a hand briefly on his shoulder and said nothing else. Above the tree line, the rain kept falling. washing away the last traces of wherever Natalie had gone, leaving Langston with nothing but the waiting and everything he could not take back. While Langston stood in the rain staring at a tree line that gave him nothing back, the answer he was looking for was miles away, lying on a worn couch in a small house with peeling paint on the porch, breathing steadily for the first time in days. Natalie had woken up on the second morning. Not dramatically, no gasping, no sudden sitting up, just a slow surfacing like someone coming up from deep water. Her eyes opening to a water-stained ceiling she did not recognize in a room that smelled like vegetable soup and old wood, with a black man she had never seen before, sitting in a chair a few feet away reading a paperback and occasionally glancing over at her the way someone watches a patient they are not entirely sure is stable yet. Latrice noticed the moment her eyes focused and put the book down. "Hey," he said. "Take it slow. You've been out for a while." Natalie blinked, tried to move her left arm, and immediately understood from the dull, deep ache that shot up to her shoulder that was not going to happen. She looked down and saw it splinted with two flat pieces of wood and wrapped tight with strips of cloth torn from something that used to be a bed sheet. "Your radius is fractured," Latrice said, watching her take it in. "Maybe the ulna, too. I cannot confirm without imaging. I have immobilized it as best I can with what I have here. The gash on your forehead needed closing. I used butterfly strips. It is holding, but you are going to need a proper stitch job when you get to a real hospital." He paused. "How does your head feel?" Natalie considered the question honestly. "Like someone filled it with wet sand. That is expected." Latrice leaned back slightly. "I am Latrice, by the way. I have been checking on you through the night." Natalie looked at him for a moment, taking in the face of the man who had apparently kept her alive. "Natalie," she said. "Natalie Langston." She paused. "Thank you for opening the door." "Do not thank me yet," Latrice said. "You still need a real hospital. That is expected. You had a mild concussion, possibly moderate. I have been checking your pupils every few hours." Latrice leaned forward slightly, looking at her directly. "Do you remember what happened?" Natalie was quiet for a moment. Outside, birds were going through their morning routines, indifferent to everything. "I ran off the road," she said finally. "There was something, an animal. I think it came out of nowhere and I swerved and then the car just went and I could not stop it." She stopped, steadied herself. "And then you walked here?" "Crawled mostly, a beat." "How far was it?" "About half a mile from where I found tire tracks on the road this morning when I went to look." Latrice said it without judgment, just fact. Half a mile with a fractured arm and a head wound in the dark. Natalie let that sit for a moment. "That sounds insane when you say it out loud." "It was insane," Latrice said simply. "It also kept you alive." Latrice fed her soup that first full day, a basic vegetable broth made from whatever he had in the house. Nothing impressive. Carrots and celery and a potato he had cut small so it would cook fast. He brought it in a ceramic mug because it was easier to hold with one hand, set it on the side table next to the couch, and told Natalie to take it slow. Natalie wrapped her good hand around the mug and looked around the room properly for the first time. The small living space, the sparse furniture, the stack of medical textbooks on the shelf next to a row of paperbacks. The complete absence of anything decorative or personal except for a single framed photo on the windowsill that was turned slightly away. "You are a nurse," Natalie said. "Was," Latrice said from the kitchen doorway. "But you live out here." "Yes." Natalie looked at him. "Why?" Latrice was quiet for a moment, leaning against the doorframe with his arms crossed. And then he said it the way he had never quite said it out loud to anyone before. Not to his supervisor when he quit, not to his therapist back in Memphis, not to himself in the quiet of this house over the months of trying to figure out what came next. "Because I got to a point where I was watching people die every week and feeling nothing," he said. "And that scared me more than the dying did. When you stop feeling it, you stop being a person and start being a machine. And I did not want to be a machine anymore." Natalie was quiet, holding the mug. "So you ran." "So I ran," Latrice said. "Ended up here." He glanced around the room at the peeling ceiling and the drafty window and the second-hand furniture. "It is not exactly what I planned, but it is quiet." Natalie looked down at the soup. Then she looked back up and something shifted in her expression. Something that was trying very hard to be humor, but was sitting right next to something much more painful. "I have to say," she said, "as someone who has stayed in some truly terrible Airbnbs, this is the worst one I've ever been in." Latrice stared at her for a second, and then he laughed. A real one, short and surprised. The kind that comes out before you can decide whether you mean it. "The reviews are going to destroy me," he said. "1 star," Natalie said. "Broken arm, no Wi-Fi. Soup was actually pretty good. I will take it." The tension in the room shifted after that. Loosened at the edges. Became something easier to breathe in. Natalie drank the soup. Latrice refilled it without being asked. Outside, the afternoon light moved slow and golden across the floorboards. And for a little while, neither of them said anything, and it was not uncomfortable. It was on the second evening that Natalie told him. Latrice had just changed the dressing on the forehead wound, butterfly strips still holding, no sign of infection, and was repacking the small kit he had put together from his medicine cabinet and a first aid box he kept under the bathroom sink. Natalie was sitting up against the arm of the couch, watching him work with the focused attention of someone who had nothing else to do and too much to think about. "Can I ask you something?" Natalie said. "Sure." "What made you decide to stop? Like, what was the actual moment?" Latrice told her about the ordinary night. The man, the 40 minutes, the coffee he poured and did not drink. He told it plainly without making it dramatic. The way you tell something when you have thought about it so many times it has lost most of its edges. "I realized I had been going through the motions for so long I had stopped actually being present," he said. "I was doing everything right and feeling nothing, and I thought if I cannot feel this anymore, what am I even doing here?" Natalie nodded slowly. Then she looked at the window at the last of the daylight going thin and gray over the fields outside. "I know what that feels like," she said. "Not the same way. But—" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "My dad, he does everything right. He shows up. He pays for everything. He handles everything that needs handling. On paper, he is an excellent father." She stopped. "But I cannot remember the last time I felt like he actually saw me. Not me as his daughter, not me as a responsibility, just me." Latrice was quiet, listening. "He is in every business magazine you can think of," Natalie continued, and her voice was steady, but there was something underneath it that was not. "People write whole articles about how brilliant he is, how decisive, how he built everything from nothing. And I read those articles sometimes, and I think, I live with this person and I do not recognize him. The man they are describing is not the man who sits across from me at dinner and checks his phone the whole time and asks how school is going and the voice he uses for conference calls." "How long has it been like that?" Latrice asked. "Always, kind of. But worse after my mom died." Natalie shifted her arm slightly and winced. She was the one who held everything together. She was the reason he came home at a reasonable hour sometimes. She was the reason we had dinner together at all. And when she was gone, there was nothing left to pull him back, and I think he just disappeared into the work completely. It was easier than dealing with everything else. She exhaled. "It was easier than dealing with me." The room was quiet for a moment. "So why were you driving out here?" Latrice said. "On that road, late at night." Natalie looked at her hands. Her good hand, her splinted arm, the soup mug sitting empty on the table. "I was going to see him," she said. "He has a property about 40 miles from where I crashed. He goes there sometimes on weekends. I do not know. To get away from the city, I think. I called him 12 times that night and he did not pick up and I got in the car. I do not know what I was going to say. I just needed to say something, and I was tired of waiting for the right moment because the right moment never comes." She paused. "I knew he would probably be cold about it. I knew he would probably make me feel like I was interrupting something important, and I was going anyway." Latrice sat with that for a moment. A daughter driving through the night, injured, alone, toward a father she knew might disappoint her again. Going anyway, because the alternative was more silence, more distance, more waiting for something that never came on its own. "That took guts," Latrice said. Natalie gave a small, tired smile. "It took a fractured arm and a head wound, apparently." Latrice looked at this young woman on his couch. Pale, banged up, carrying a loneliness that was so familiar it made his chest ache, and felt something move in him that he had not felt in months. Not pity, something warmer and more specific than that. The feeling of recognizing someone, of seeing yourself in another person's particular kind of tired and wanting to tell them they were not as alone in it as they thought. He had not felt that in a long time. He thought maybe he had burned it out of himself for good. Apparently not. Latrice did not say anything after that. He just reached over, picked up Natalie's empty soup mug, and went to refill it. The quiet, unhurried way of someone who understood that some things did not need a response, just a witness. Natalie watched him go and felt for the first time in days something that was not pain or fear or exhaustion, something smaller and steadier than all of those things. The particular relief of being seen by someone who was not looking for anything back. What neither of them knew was that miles away, everything was about to change. The tip came in on the fourth morning through a phone number that had been posted on every telephone pole and community board within miles of the crash site. An elderly woman named Mrs. Garland, who lived on the county road about 2 miles from Latrice's house, called the search hotline and told the volunteer on the other end that she had seen a young white woman moving slow and holding her arm funny, cutting across the field behind her property in the direction of the old Tanner place about a few nights back. She had not called sooner, she explained, because she had assumed it was somebody who had had too much to drink and was taking a shortcut home, and she had not wanted to cause trouble for anyone over nothing. But her granddaughter had shown her the flyer that morning, and the girl in the photo looked an awful lot like the girl she had seen, and she figured she ought to say something just in case. The volunteer flagged it immediately. Holloway had the information in front of Langston within 20 minutes. The old Tanner place, Holloway explained, had been rented out for the past several months to a man from Memphis, a nurse apparently, who had moved out here on his own and kept mostly to himself. Nobody knew much about him except that he was quiet, minded his own business, and occasionally bought vegetables from the farm stand on Route 9. Langston was already moving toward the car before Holloway finished the sentence. "Mr. Langston, let me send a unit first." "How far is it?" Langston said. Holloway hesitated. "About 17 miles. But, sir, if she is there and she is stable, it is better if we—" 17 miles, Langston said, and got in the car. He drove it in under 20 minutes on roads that were not built for speed. The headlights cutting through the dark ahead of him. The GPS taking him off the main road and onto a stretch of unpaved county lane that ran between open fields and old fence lines. His hands were on the wheel, and his jaw was tight, and his brain was doing the thing it had been doing for days, running every possible outcome in parallel, trying to prepare for all of them at once. She was there, and she was alive. She was there, and she was not. She was not there at all, and this was just another dead end in a string of dead ends, and he would be back at the command post by midnight, standing in a parking lot staring at a tree line, waiting for something that was not coming. He had spent days being Gregory Langston, organized, resourceful, in command of every variable he could get his hands on, and none of it had found her. All his money, all his contacts, all his helicopters and search teams and investigators. And it took an elderly woman with a flyer and a memory to do what a fortune could not. The lane narrowed and then the house appeared in the headlights. Small, old, sitting back from the road behind a patch of overgrown yard, its paint peeling at the edges, its porch sagging slightly on the left side. The kind of house that looked like it had been quietly enduring for decades without anyone paying it much attention. There was a light on inside. Langston pulled the car to the side of the lane, cut the engine, and sat there for a moment in the sudden quiet. His heart was doing something irregular, and he was aware of it in a way he normally never was. He was aware of his own breathing, aware of the specific fear that had lived in his chest for days and was now pulling itself tight because whatever was behind that door was going to be one thing or the other, and he was about to find out which. He got out of the car and walked toward the house. There was a window to the left of the front door, its curtain not quite fully drawn, a warm strip of yellow light coming through the gap. Langston stepped onto the porch slowly, not making a sound, and moved to the side of the window and looked through. What he saw stopped him where he stood. Latrice was sitting on the edge of the coffee table, leaning forward with a mug in his hand, saying something he could not hear through the glass. And on the couch, propped against the armrest with a splinted arm resting across her stomach and a strip of white bandaging above her left eyebrow, was Natalie. Natalie, who was alive. Natalie, who was looking at Latrice and laughing at something, a real laugh, the kind that reached her eyes, in a house miles from where days of searching had turned up nothing. Langston's hand came up and pressed flat against the outside wall of the house, and he stood there and breathed because it was all he could do for a moment. His vision blurred, and he let it, standing alone in the dark on the porch of a stranger's house, watching his daughter laugh from the other side of a dirty window, like a man watching something he had almost permanently lost the right to see. He gave himself a few seconds, then he knocked on the door. The laughter inside stopped. He heard movement, footsteps crossing the floor, and then the door opened and he was looking at a black man in his late 30s. Steady eyes, a guarded expression, the particular alertness of someone who lived alone and had learned to assess situations quickly. He looked at him the way you look at something unexpected. Not scared, just measuring. He must have been something to see. Days in the same suit, now wrinkled beyond recovery, jaw unshaved, eyes carrying the specific hollowness of someone who had not slept in days and had been running on fear and caffeine since before that. Gregory Langston, who walked into boardrooms and made people straighten in their chairs without saying a word, standing on a rotting porch in the Alabama dark, looking like something the storm had left behind. "My name is Gregory Langston," he said, and his voice came out rough at the edges. "I believe my daughter is here. Her name is Natalie." Latrice looked at him for a moment, at the ruined suit, the unsteady hands, the eyes of a man who had been somewhere very dark for days and was only now standing at the edge of the light. He stepped back and opened the door wider without saying anything. He walked in. Natalie was already looking at the doorway when he came through it. She had heard his voice. She would know that voice anywhere, the particular low register of it, even stripped of all its usual authority, and she had gone completely still. The laugh that had been on her face a minute ago was gone, replaced by something that did not have a clean name. Not joy, not fear, not anger, but all three of them sitting in the same place at the same time, pulling in different directions. She looked at him, really looked at him the way she had not in years, and saw something she had never seen on her father's face before. Not the controlled composure of the boardroom, not the polite distance of their phone calls, not the carefully managed grief of the months after her mother died. Something rawer than all of that. Something that looked more than anything else like a man who had spent days being terrified and was only now in this moment allowing himself to feel the full weight of what that terror had been about. "Dad," she said, and her voice came out barely above a whisper. Langston stood in the doorway of a stranger's living room, looking at his daughter alive on a couch with a splinted arm and a bandaged head. And for the first time in as long as either of them could remember, he had absolutely nothing to say. The silence in the room lasted a long time. Langston stood in the doorway and did not move, and Natalie sat on the couch and did not move, and the only sound was the low creak of the house settling around them and the faint tick of a clock somewhere in the kitchen. Latrice had stepped back against the far wall without being asked. The way someone steps out of the frame of a photograph they understand is not theirs to be in. Langston's eyes moved slowly around the room. The worn couch, the mismatched furniture, the lamp with no shade throwing bare yellow light across the floorboards, the ceramic mug on the side table, the folded blanket at the foot of the couch, the first aid supplies left on the coffee table, butterfly strips, medical tape, a bottle of antiseptic. A room that had nothing in it that was not necessary and somehow felt more like a place someone actually lived than any room in his top-floor office or his Atlanta house with its catered furniture and its clean sight lines and its complete absence of anything that looked like it had been used and loved and held on to past its prime. His daughter had been here for days. She had been safe and warm and cared for in this small, tired, honest room while he had been standing in parking lots in the rain, spending money he did not know how to stop spending, because it was the only language he knew for trying to fix things. He crossed the room and lowered himself into the armchair across from the couch. Slowly, like a man whose body had finally started sending him the bill for days of no sleep and no food, and nothing but forward motion. He sat with his elbows on his knees and looked at Natalie, at the bandaging above her eyebrow and the splinted arm resting across her stomach, and his jaw worked for a moment without producing anything. "I did not know how to find you," he said finally. It came out quiet and stripped of everything, just the plain fact of it. "I had helicopters, I had search teams, I had people who do this professionally, and I could not." He stopped. "I could not find you." Natalie watched him. "I know," she said. "I heard the helicopters the second night. I did not know they were yours." Something moved across his face at that, a flash of something that was almost unbearable to look at. And then he nodded slowly and looked down at his hands that had signed contracts and shaken the hands of presidents and moved money across continents, now sitting open on his knees in a stranger's living room, looking like they did not know what they were supposed to do with themselves. The silence came back, and then Langston did something that Natalie had never seen him do in 24 years of being his daughter. He slid off the chair, not gracefully, not deliberately. It was more like the chair simply stopped being able to hold him. He went to his knees on the worn, hardwood floor of Latrice's living room, and he stayed there. And he looked at his daughter from that position with the eyes of a man who had run completely out of ways to keep the distance between himself and the truth of what he had done. Natalie's breath caught. She did not say anything. "I used work," Langston said, and his voice was low and unsteady in a way she had never heard before, "as a reason to not be present for your mother when she needed me. And when she died, I used it as a reason to not be present for you." He paused. "Not because the work actually required it, because it was easier. Because as long as I was moving forward, closing the next deal, solving the next problem, managing the next crisis, I did not have to stop and sit with what I had lost. I did not have to feel it." His voice dropped further. "And you were the one who paid for that. You were the one who was alone in it. And I told myself you were fine, because you never told me you were not, and I never stopped long enough to actually ask." The room was completely still. "I sent money when you needed things," he continued. "I showed up for the important occasions. I handled everything that could be handled from a distance, and I called that being a father." He exhaled, slow and ragged. "It was not. I know it was not. I knew it while I was doing it, and I kept doing it anyway because stopping meant admitting how much I had already missed, and I did not know how to do that." Natalie was very still on the couch. Her good hand was pressed flat against her thigh, and her jaw was tight, and her eyes were bright in a way that meant she was holding something back through sheer force of will, the way she had learned to hold things back through years of practice in the particular school of having a father who was not fully there. "You know what the worst part is?" she said, and her voice was quieter than Langston expected, quieter and more controlled, which somehow made it land harder than if she had shouted. "It was never about the money. It was never about the events you showed up for or the things you arranged. I knew you loved me. I always knew that." She paused. "But knowing someone loves you and feeling like they actually see you are two completely different things, Dad. And I spent a really long time feeling invisible to you. Not unloved, invisible." She looked at him directly. "Like I was a responsibility you were managing rather than a person you were choosing to know." Langston's head dropped forward slightly. He did not argue it. There was nothing to argue. "I drove out here because I was tired of waiting," Natalie said. "I called you 12 times that night and you did not pick up, and I got in the car because I thought if I could just get in front of you, actually in the same room with you, maybe something would be different. Maybe you would actually look at me." Her voice cracked slightly, just at the edge of the last word, and she steadied it. "I was not even sure what I was going to say. I just knew I could not keep waiting for the right moment because the right moment was never going to come on its own. It never did." She looked at him on his knees on the floor of a stranger's house, his expensive suit destroyed, his face carrying days of exhaustion and years of undealt with grief, and something shifted in her expression. Not forgiveness exactly, not yet, but the first small opening toward it, the crack in a wall that had been built one unanswered phone call at a time. "I do not want an investment, Dad," she said. "I just want a father. That is all I ever wanted." Langston looked up at her, and his eyes were wet, and he did not try to manage it. did not turn away or compose himself or reach for the controlled expression he had worn for decades like a second skin. He just let her see it, all of it. The grief and the guilt and the specific devastation of a man who had built an empire and lost the thing that mattered most in the process of building it. "I know," he said. "I know. I'm sorry, Natalie, I'm so sorry." From his place against the wall, Latrice watched all of it and did not move or speak. He had spent many years in emergency rooms, learning that saving a person meant stabilizing the body, stopping the bleeding, keeping the heart beating, buying time until the real healing could begin. He had believed somewhere along the way that the body was the whole job, that if the vitals were stable, his work was done. Standing in his own living room, watching a father collapse on his knees in front of his daughter, he understood something he had not had a word for before. The body was only ever part of it. The other part, the part that determined whether a person actually survived in any way that counted, was this: being witnessed, being told the truth, being seen by the person whose seeing mattered most. That was the wound underneath the wound. The one no butterfly strip or splint or soup could touch, and it needed tending just as urgently as anything he had ever treated in that ER. He had opened his door a few nights ago thinking he was done with all of it, done with caring, done with the cost of it, done with what it took out of him every time he let himself be present for someone else's pain. But he was standing here now, fully present, watching something real and irreversible happen between two people in his living room. And he was not empty. He was not numb. He was right here feeling all of it, and it was not destroying him. It turned out he had not burned it out of himself after all. Nobody moved for a long time after that. Langston stayed on his knees, and Natalie stayed on the couch, and Latrice stayed against the wall, and the house held all of it without comment. The grief and the relief and the particular exhaustion of two people who had just said things to each other that had been waiting years to be said. Eventually, Latrice pushed off the wall, went to the kitchen, and came back with 2 mugs of coffee. He sat down on the coffee table without a word. It was the only thing he could think to do, and it was the right thing. Langston picked his up with both hands and looked at his daughter and said quietly, "We need to get you to a hospital." Natalie looked at her splinted arm and then at Latrice. "He has been taking good care of me." "I know," Langston said. "And now you need imaging and a proper cast and someone to look at that head wound under real lights." He paused. "Please." The please was what did it. Natalie nodded. The hospital was in the next county, a real one, not the small underfunded facility Langston had stood in days ago. Natalie was admitted that same night. The X-rays confirmed what Latrice had suspected: fracture of the radius, clean break, no surgical intervention needed. The head wound was re-examined, properly sutured, and the concussion graded as moderate. The attending physician told Langston that whoever had managed her care in the field had done it correctly, that the splinting had prevented further displacement, that the pressure management on the head wound had been exactly right. Langston listened to all of it and then asked for the doctor's honest assessment of what would have happened if she had not received that care immediately after the accident. The doctor was quiet for a moment. "The head injury would have been the primary concern," he said carefully. "With a moderate concussion and an open wound, without intervention, the risk of complications increases significantly over time. She was fortunate someone was there who knew what they were doing." Langston thanked him and walked out into the hallway and stood there for a moment with his hand pressed flat against the wall, breathing. He visited every day after that. Every single day for the 2 weeks Natalie was in the hospital, and then every other day through the month of outpatient recovery that followed. He did not wear a suit to a single one of those visits. He came in jeans and a plain shirt, sometimes with coffee, sometimes with food from the diner near the hospital that Natalie had mentioned she liked, and he stayed for hours instead of the careful 45-minute windows he used to schedule for family obligations. They talked, really talked, the way they had not in years, maybe longer, about her mother, about the things they both remembered and the things they remembered differently, about the years after she died, and how each of them had moved through that loss so separately they might as well have been in different countries. It was awkward sometimes. It was painful. Often there were conversations that stalled out and had to be picked back up the next day. But Langston kept showing up and Natalie kept letting him, and slowly, unevenly, the distance between them began to close. One afternoon, about a week into her recovery, Natalie told him a story about her mother that he had never heard. Something small. A Sunday morning when Natalie was 7 and Sarah had let her put makeup on her face, and they had both laughed so hard Sarah cried. Langston listened to it with his elbows on his knees and his eyes on his daughter, and when she finished, he said, "She never told me that one." And Natalie said, "There were a lot of things she kept just for us." And Langston nodded and looked at his hands and said, "I am glad she had that with you." It was the first time he had spoken about Sarah without the carefully managed tone he had been using for years to keep the grief at a manageable distance. And Natalie noticed and did not say anything about it, just kept talking, giving him the space to stay present in it. Weeks after finding Natalie, Langston drove back out to Latrice's house alone. He came with nothing expensive, no envelope, no check made out in the moment, no gesture that could be measured in dollars. He had tried that approach once the morning after he found Natalie standing in Latrice's kitchen, asking what he could do for him, what he needed, how he could make this right, the only way he knew how. Latrice had looked at him steadily and said, "I do not need anything, Mr. Langston. I am glad she is okay." The tone was not rude, it was just completely final. So he came with a thermos of coffee and sat at Latrice's kitchen table and told him what he had done instead. He had contacted the county health board the week before. The area around Hale County had no primary care facility within miles. The closest clinic had closed years ago when its funding dried up. Langston had arranged to cover the full cost of building and equipping a new one, a proper facility with 2 examination rooms, a small lab, and a staff of 3. It would serve the surrounding area at no cost to patients. The paperwork was already moving. "I am putting your name on it," he said. "The Latrice Reed Community Health Clinic." Latrice sat across from him with his coffee and was quiet for a long moment. "You did not have to do that," he said. "I know," Langston said. "That is why I did it." Latrice looked at him. This man who weeks ago had been standing on his porch in a destroyed suit, shaking, and who was now sitting at his kitchen table in a flannel shirt talking about county health boards, and he nodded slowly. "Okay," he said. "Thank you." "Thank you," Langston said, for opening the door. And just like that, the story of Latrice, Natalie, and Gregory Langston comes to an end. 3 people who had no reason to find each other. A nurse who had given everything until there was nothing left. A daughter who refused to stop reaching for a father who had forgotten how to be reached. And a man who had built an empire, but lost the only things inside it that actually mattered. They did not find each other because of luck. They found each other because one person chose to answer the door, one person refused to stop driving, and one person finally got off his knees, not to stand back up, but to finally kneel in the truth of what he had done. And that brings us to what this story is really about. The walls we build to protect ourselves from being hurt are the same walls that keep us from being known. We dress them up with good reasons. I need space, I am focused on work, I am not ready. But a fortress is still a prison, no matter how reasonable the reasons for building it sound. Healing does not happen in isolation. It happens in the uncomfortable, ordinary act of letting someone see you when you are not okay. Latrice did not heal because he found the perfect quiet place. He healed because someone knocked on his door late one night and needed him to show up, and he chose to answer. The most important doors in your life will not announce themselves. They will arrive uninvited, inconvenient, asking more of you than you feel like you have left. In the darkness of a rural Alabama night, an exhausted nurse named Latrice made a simple but life-changing choice. He opened his door to a bleeding stranger. What he didn't know was that this single act of compassion would not only save a young woman's life but also begin healing the deep rift between her and her billionaire father, Gregory, while quietly restoring Latrice's own wounded spirit. This story leaves us with a profoundly emotional lesson. The walls we build to protect ourselves from pain are often the same walls that isolate us from love, connection, and true healing. We bury ourselves in work, create emotional distance from our families, and tell ourselves there will be time later. But, as Gregory painfully discovered, later doesn't always come. Real presence matters more than any provision or success. True healing rarely happens in perfect conditions or comfortable silence. It happens in the messy, inconvenient moments when we choose to answer the door anyway. When we show up exhausted, when we allow ourselves to be vulnerable, and when we finally let the people we love truly see us. Latrice thought he had nothing left to give, yet in giving, he found himself again. Natalie found the father she had been desperately reaching for. And Gregory learned that sometimes getting on your knees in humility is the strongest thing a man can do. If this story touched your heart, tell me in the comments. What door in your life have you been hesitant to open? I read every single comment. If you want more powerful, soul-stirring stories like this, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Let's keep this meaningful journey going together. Welcome home.